The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to Live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, an ongoing series designed to enlighten you on the benefits and advantages of podcasting. And now here's your host, David Garofalo.
Welcome, everybody, to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you grow, get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line. Let's help bring your marketing and advertising into the 21st century. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting since 2010, and I've created a six-figure income from doing it while growing my own business at the same time. That's what this show is all about, broadcasting live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe in Salem, New Hampshire. Today, this is the big one, folks. This is the one everybody cares about that's doing podcasts. If you've been doing podcasts, I know this is the one you struggle with. You try to figure it out. It is how to monetize your podcast. It's a 21-minute podcast, so let's start the clock right now. And here we go. How to monetize your podcast. First, what is monetize? The first four letters, M-O-N-E, it's money, right? How to monetize money. But it doesn't directly have to be money, but it can eventually become money. It's an asset. It's an asset that can be currency or able to convert into money eventually. That is what we're talking about for monetization. One monetization might be to get your podcast listened to by a new client or a potential client. Your podcast can help find new clients for you, new customers for your business. If that would end up happening, you would see the connection of monetization that ended up happening. You're doing a podcast, now you get a new client for it, and it becomes money, right? So there's a direct monetization that happens in there by getting a client out of your podcast. Some people will say, well, I'm not actually getting the money handed right in there. No, it's monetization. It's what you want to end up doing. And there's many, many ways. I'm going to get to a lot of them. Listeners may soon become customers of your product or service, and one that you may recommend, something you may recommend that may or may not be your product itself. And eventually you get money for it. Have potential customers and clients raise their hands by giving some content away free, which is what we're doing here on this podcast, right? We're giving you, the podcaster, information, and then we may ask you at some point to raise your hand and ask for something that is going to be our ask, or we're going to lead them into a sale. What I'd like to happen here is you're listening to the show, you're doing your podcast, you're not getting the response rate you thought you would get, you're not getting the quality of the content you want to produce, and maybe you want to become a member of Studio 21 Podcast Cafe or be in the United Podcast Network. That's what this show is trying to create as you as a listener. So what are we giving you? We're giving you free content, information, things to help you grow your podcast. But the underlying factor is here, we'd love you to come join us and come on board to it. And maybe someday you're listening to it and you come up and you say, listen, I want to join the network and come up. So that's what we're hoping for some of our monetization. Another thing you may be doing as whatever business you're in is you want to make yourself the authority on the subject that you're doing, whatever that may be. We have a cigar podcast. It's called The Cigar Authority. The idea is we become the authority on the subject of premium cigars around the world. We've done a great job doing it. It's an 8-year podcast. It's the highest, most listened to cigar podcast in the world in 140 countries, 1.2 million downloads a year. Yes, we have accomplished that by making us the authority on it. What also could happen as you become the authority on the subject, that you are actually paid for speaking engagements. They actually want the authority on that subject at their convention, at their event, at their business meeting, or something they would want there. So you could get a paying gig out of this, which is another way to monetize your show. Now you're getting people that want the guy on the show and they're willing to pay for that person to be there. Another way you would want to monetize your show is to build a mailing list of targeted prospects for the subject that you're talking about. And this will be an on-target, direct target marketing list of people that care about the subject. Back to the cigar industry that I'm in, when I get people to listen to our show and add it to our mailing list, you know that the people that are on that list care about cigars. 1 out of 1,000 people use the product. The people we have on the list is 100% key market product for that. Whatever your product is, you will gain a list of people that are perfect for that direct target marketing that will happen. This way you can find new clients and ask them to do business with you or with your advertisers that you're going to have. You can promote your website, get people to your website. And as you know, this is a game of numbers. On your website, at that point, you'll get them to do what you want them to do. If there's a buy now feature, or it's make a consultation with us, or again, it all depends on what your services or what your product is that you sell or what you want to accomplish in yours. But everybody wants monetization. Sell your services. You can actually sell them as free consultations, and then at the consultation, then it becomes a buy. So you'll say, oh, I did a free consultation. There's no money in that for me. At your consultation, again, you become the authority on the subject. It's a slam dunk. You end up closing the sale, and then the buy happens at that point. So your monetization happens because you got the client via the show that you ended up doing, and you turned your show into a money-making proposition because the close happens when you go at that product. And if you actually have a product, not a service, then it's the exact sale of that product. Go to this website, grab it, or come and visit me and pick it up, or whatever that exact product is. You can sell swag on your podcast. You'll have fans of your show that maybe want to have the coffee mug, say, with the name of your show on it, or the T-shirt, or the whatever it ends up being. And, you know, you can look at that as some expenses that you'd have to actually buy those products, or there's companies out there that make one-at-a-timers. So if you wanted one coffee mug, when that coffee mug gets sold is when that coffee mug would get made, and only one would get made, and you would make money from that one. So absolutely no upfront cost to you at all, because they're making one at a time and you're going to make money on it. There's a company out there called Cafe Press, CAFEPRESS, cafepress.com. You'll find them. You set up a little store. You click some buttons of the items. You put that onto your website or onto your show page of where your podcast is, and then the people can actually buy branded products of your podcast or of your company or whatever it is, and you end up making money, a percentage of money or a dollar amount of each product that you end up selling. Or you can treat it as a marketing tool. You don't care to make any money on the product. You would just like a whole bunch of people advertising your products on their shirts and on their coffee mugs, or a little of both. So the options are there in many, many ways. These are just some of the ways to monetize your podcast. But how do you really make money? Yes, you can do it. You can also make real money at the same time. I did in my podcast, and you can too. I'm going to take just 1 minute, and when I return, I'm going to show you the money-making ways of a podcast, real ways to monetize your podcast. Let's just take 1 minute out to hear about Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a live working full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business, or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute, no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we are back. today talking about how to monetize your podcast, how to make money with it, real money. As I say, I've been doing this for now 8 years, doing podcasts. I've turned it into a six-figure income, the podcast by itself, and at the same time helping my core business grow and how to make myself the authority on the subject. You can do it too, and there's lots of ways to end up doing it. First off, the thing you have to do is get a podcast going. It's so important to begin a podcast. You can't improve your podcast until you begin. And once you begin, it becomes a process of it. You got to get listeners. Once you get listeners, there's ways to monetize it, and there's lots and lots of ways, and we're going to get to a lot more of them right now. So another way to monetize your podcast is to sell sponsorships. And if you listen to people's podcasts, maybe here at the beginning of a show that you'll hear brought to you by or thanks for our supporters, and they may list the name of companies that are supporting them. This show is sponsored by ABC, and this podcast, when you put that inside the podcast, this is what's great. This is the win-win of the podcast. It is that the advertiser who advertises on it, now let's assume they're used to advertising on a TV show or a radio show or even print. When that time has come by, when that 1 minute radio commercial came by in the little area that it broadcasted in, that commercial has come and gone. It's over. If you weren't paying attention to it, it's gone. And you were interested in the subject, it's gone. If you were listening to it, paying attention to it, but you were driving and you couldn't jot down the email address, the website or the phone number or whatever you want to do, it's gone. It's gone forever. The same thing happens when it's on TV. It's a flash. It's gone by. You didn't pay attention. You got up. It's over. When it comes to podcasting, the advertisement that's inside there is intact forever and ever and ever. So you heard the little advertising in here about Studio 21, and that commercial content that's in there that tells you about the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is in this show, and it's in there forever and ever as it is. So as you're out there looking for sponsors for your show, keep in mind that this is the best advertising they could ever do. It is a bargain compared to everything else, so feel good about it. It becomes a win-win situation. If an advertiser advertises on your show, you have an advertiser, and there's the win for you. Let me tell you, for the advertiser itself, advertising on your show, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every minute, everywhere, that commercial can be heard forever and ever. What a bargain. And manufacturers of products and companies are looking for those bargains now. It's early on for them. This is still the golden age of podcasting. A lot of people don't get it completely yet, but let me tell you, you're in at the right possible time to it. It is the best value going for an advertiser. So getting a sponsor in your show, you can hold your head up high and feel good about taking their money and helping them at the same time, because it is the best money they could ever spend is advertise on your show. So selling sponsorships is one way. Selling commercial content deep inside. So as opposed to saying brought to you by, and that's how the show begins or ends, and thank you for our sponsors, this is actually commercial content that goes at a break within the show. So some people look at a break, a commercial within the show, and say, okay, it's there, and you know something, it can be fast forward, it can be skipped over, or anything like that. Let me tell you, and there's lots of research that's been done. When people are listening to your podcast and you have a sponsor, an advertiser that's within your show, and they're getting free content for you, and they're learning to like you as a person and trust you as a person, they're listening to your sponsors, and you know something? They're more likely than not to actually support your sponsor. So again, you can hold your head up high to the sponsor because you are providing them with a good advertising platform, much, much better than everything else that is out there and available to them. So their name in their commercial content stays intact 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. While that is sitting there, while you're sleeping, that commercial is working for them and it's working for you. You can sell segments within your show, and a segment brought to you by XYZ company or whatever it is within the podcast. And again, it lasts forever. So a little segment in the break. Oh, we're going to go to view a mail, for instance, and it's brought to you by the Mail House, or brought to you by UPS, or brought to you by whatever company it is that would be associated with that or would want the connection to when you get to your mail segment of it, and that what is brought to you by. That is a strong content, a segment content, because it is brought in not as commercial content, meaning, okay, it's time for a commercial. Let me turn the listener, let me turn off my mind to the commercial that somebody's, trying to sell me something at this point. But a segment brought to you by that person, and maybe a one or two liner within there. It's brought to you by UPS, ground to whatever. We can do it 24 hours a day to you, and overnight packages, no problem, or whatever it's going to end up being, that intact. And that one or two liner that's in there, and then go right into your mail segment of your show. And again, whatever your show is about, the different segments that can be put in there. And this is segmentation, and we did a show on this, but there's lots of segments you can put within your show, and they can be advertisers or people sponsoring that segment within your whole show. If you give my other show a listen to, which is the Cigar Authority, that I tell you about, a six-figure income, you'll hear a lot of that within there. Not only do we have commercial breaks in it, but it's monetized every which way it can possibly be monetized. Every move we make is brought to you by something. And, it becomes I feel very good about my advertisers, that I'm giving them lots of opportunity to get their word out, because there's lots of places within that it can be there. Another way is an affiliate program. Talk about your product, and give a discount code for a certain money off. The affiliates on your show, you can actually interview the affiliates and bring them onto the show. It should be a product you believe in, that you believe is good, because you're going to be asking your listeners to go on there, buy their product, and put this coupon code in there that's going to give them a discount. It will not only give them a discount, but it'll make you money at the same time. And those affiliate programs are all over online. Look up affiliate programs, and you'll find people that'll be happy to do it with you. You only make money when they actually sell the product. Sometimes they'll work it a little both ways. We'll give you a little bit of money, and we'll give you a lot of money when you actually sell the product. Now there's national advertising. This is big national companies that want to have their advertisement within your show. And it could be anything that's there, and they're going to target market, and they're going to end up wanting to be on a show that's, let's take the cigar show, for instance, maybe a razor company, because men use razors. Almost 100% of our listenership would be men 21 years or older, so maybe a razor company would be a target market for advertising on such a show as a cigar show. Maybe the ladies' product would not end up working so well, but they will buy advertising on a show, and they buy that advertising with a CPM basis, which means it's sold by the thousand. CPM stands for cost per milli. Milli stands for thousand in Latin. So it's cost per thousand, and that's per thousand downloads of that podcast. Now, obviously, the podcast continues to grow after you've done the show and things like that. So they're going to look back at the previous month or two and try to find an average, for instance. So if a podcast CPM, let's just assume this company will pay $25 per thousand. That means they'll pay $25 per thousand listeners, and that would be unique downloads or streams or listens on there. So I would say you need about 5,000 downloads per episode for them to even be interested in you. So if you got a few hundred people to listen to your show, listen, the national advertiser isn't interested right now. You get into the $5,000 range, here's how it would work. Let's say 10,000, you have 10,000 listeners for easy math. It's $25 per, they're paying $25 per CPM. So you multiply 10, that's 10,000 listeners, by $25. That comes out to $250 per episode for one commercial within that content. You can find brokers that will take a percentage of that, and they'll actually go find advertisers for you. Or you can do it yourself. But don't wait for them to find you, because, frankly, they never will. You got to get off your butt, and you got to go out there and look for this if it's there. If you have those kind of listeners, we're talking about 5,000, 10,000 listeners per episode. The national advertisers is interested, but they just don't know you exist. So you got to let them know you're out there. Listen, these are just some of the ways to monetize your podcast. There's a whole lot more. And if you want to talk about them, message me at the Contact Us button at the Studio 21 Podcast.cafe. That's where I am. If you're interested in being part of Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, part of the United Podcast Network, look me up, give me a call, come down and visit me. I'll buy you the cup of coffee. Next week, we're going to tell you where to post your podcast. How do you get all these listeners? How are you going to get 5,000 to 10,000 people listening to your show? It's where you post them to get more downloads. Without more viewers, you are not able to monetize your podcast effectively. You need more listeners. Where to post your podcast really matters, and we're going to talk about that next week. That's my 21 minutes, and we are out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.